causing death and destruction every day. It has shocked the world and shaken the international order. For months, we have exposed Russia's long list of lies. They claimed they did not plan to invade Ukraine, but they did. They claimed they were withdrawing their troops, but they sent in even more. They claim to be protecting civilians, but they are killing civilians. Now, they are making absurd claims about biological labs and chemical weapons in Ukraine. This is just another lie, and we are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons. The Ukrainian people are fighting bravely, defending their homes and their future, and we must support them. Tomorrow we will be joined by the Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov and our other partners Georgia, Finland, Sweden and the European Union. The whole world has condemned this senseless war. NATO allies, the European Union and other countries have introduced unprecedented sanctions on Russia. For many years, NATO allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops. Many of them are now fighting on the front lines. Allies have also provided significant quantities of critical equipment, including anti-tank and air defense weapons, drones, ammunition and fuel. This training and equipment is helping Ukraine to defend itself. Ukraine has a fundamental right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter, and NATO allies and partners will continue to help Ukraine uphold that right by providing military equipment and financial and humanitarian assistance. NATO's core task is to protect and defend all allies. We have responded to this crisis quickly, activating our defense plans, raising our readiness and deploying the NATO response force for the first time for collective defense. There are now hundreds of thousands of forces on heightened alert across the alliance. 100,000 US troops in Europe and around 40,000 troops under direct NATO command, mostly in the eastern part of the alliance. Backed by major air and naval power, as well as air defenses. The US is currently deploying Patriot batteries to Poland, and Germany and the Netherlands are also deploying Patriots to Slovakia. All of this sends an unmistakable message. An attack on one ally will be met with a decisive response from the whole alliance. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its military integration in Belarus creates a new security reality on the European continent. So we need to reset NATO's military posture for this new reality. Tomorrow, ministers will start an important discussion on concrete measures to reinforce our security for the longer term in all domains. On land, this could include substantially more forces in the eastern part of the alliance at higher readiness and with more pre-positioned equipment. We will also consider major increases to our air and naval deployments, strengthening our integrated air and missile defense, reinforcing our cyber defenses, and holding more and larger exercises. I expect we will task NATO's military commanders to develop options for our Madrid summit in June. Major reinforcements of our defense will require major increases in investment. I welcome that Germany and other allies have already announced they are stepping up. And I encourage all allies to spend a minimum of 2% of GDP on defense. We must do more, so we must also invest more to protect peace and freedom and uphold our values at this critical time. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with CNN.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether you can say whether the NATO alliance has seen evidence that China has been providing Russia with any kind of assistance that would help it on the battlefield, whether that's military equipment or MREs, food for troops, anything of that kind. And also with regard to the situation that we saw earlier this week with Russia targeting a military base very close to Poland's border, I'm wondering what you can say about the kind of red lines and whether there would be any kind of consequences if a missile, for example, were accidentally to enter NATO territory or on purpose. Thank you.
So NATO's core responsibility, our main responsibility, is to protect and defend all NATO allies, 1 billion people in 30 different countries, and to ensure that we also do that now in a more dangerous security situation in Europe caused by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We have increased the presence in the eastern part of the alliance, we have increased the readiness of our troops, and we are deploying more capabilities, especially to the eastern part of the alliance. So an attack on one ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance, and we are there to protect and defend every inch of NATO allied territory. When we see more military activities, when we see actually fighting going on close to NATO borders, there is always a risk for incidents and accidents. And therefore we have to make every effort to prevent such incidents and accidents, and if they happen, to make sure that they don't spiral out of control and create really dangerous situations. We are very closely monitoring the airspace and the border areas around NATO, and our military commanders also have the lines to their Russian commanders to help to prevent incidents and accidents and also prevent them from spiraling out of control if they happen. On China, so China should join the rest of the world condemning strongly the brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And any support to Russia, military support, any other type of support, will actually help Russia conduct a brutal war against an independent sovereign nation, Ukraine, and help them to continue to wage war which is causing death, suffering, and an enormous amount of destruction. So China has an obligation as a member of the UN Security Council to actually support and uphold international law, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law. So we call on Russia to clearly condemn the invasion and of course not support Russia, and we are closely monitoring any signs of support from China to Russia.
We'll go to the National News Agency of Ukraine, over there.
Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Secretary General, NATO have a glorious story of supporting some countries and preventing bloodshed, for example, like it happened in Sarajevo, in Kosovo, and so on. What is the threshold for NATO when the Russian killings will overcome that threshold to NATO for direct involvement? And the short follow-up because of that, if you follow the Russian rhetorics, they are not going to stop purely in Ukraine. So that the question is, Isn't it the right time for NATO to intervene, to defeat and to break the Putin's military machine while it's stick in Ukraine, while waiting when the Russian bombs will be falling to the European capitals? Thank you.
NATO allies have supported Ukraine for many years, and especially since Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time back in 2014. And NATO allies like the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada have also helped to train tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces, special operation forces and other troops. And they are now bravely fighting and resisting the invading Russian forces. And I think this support over many years have proven extremely important in strengthening the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Ukrainian armed forces are much bigger, much stronger, much better equipped, much better trained now than in 2014, and I'm glad that NATO allies have helped to achieve that with the training and with the equipment. Then of course it's first and foremost the courage of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian political leadership that has actually enabled them to fight back, to slow down, to resist the brutal invasion conducted by the Russian Federation and which is a responsibility of President Putin. And it is President Putin who is responsible for this war. He can end this war now, withdraw all his troops now, and then engage in good faith in a political effort to find a diplomatic solution. So we are calling on President Putin to do exactly that. Then NATO's Ukraine is a highly valued partner which we have supported and continue to support, and allies are also stepping up support, partly with military equipment, partly with financial support, humanitarian support, but also by imposing the sanctions which is forcing, which are actually crippling Russian economy. Our responsibility as an alliance is to protect and defend all allies, and we are sending a clear message that we are ready to do so by increasing the presence in the eastern part of the alliance. But again, it is Russia and President Putin that are responsible for the invasion of Ukraine, and President Putin should end this senseless war by withdrawing its forces from Ukraine.
Okay, Politico.
Thank you. I'm Lily from Politico. Why do the US and NATO insist that fighter jets won't be helpful for Ukraine when the Ukrainians themselves say otherwise? Shouldn't it be up to the Ukrainian authorities to say what would be helpful for them? Thank you.
NATO allies are providing many different types of equipment, including advanced air defense systems, which have actually helped the Ukrainians to shoot down Russian planes, Russian missiles, and the allies continue to provide support also when it comes to different types of air defense systems. But I will not go into the details of every type of supply, every type of support, exactly how and where, because I think that will just make it harder and more difficult to continue to provide this type of support. NATO allies are stepping up and providing also advanced air defense systems.
Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. Dan Michaels, Wall Street Journal. To follow up on the earlier question, there have apparently been UAV incursions into NATO airspace. Apparently one Russian drone entered and left Polish airspace, and another one crashed in NATO territory. How do you determine when something like that is an act of aggression or an act that warrants response? And you were talking earlier about escalation. How do you ensure that something like that is handled in a way that is appropriate and doesn't get out of control? Thank you.
Well, I cannot confirm the latest incidents you are referring to, but in general I can say that we are stepping up our vigilance, our presence, the way we monitor our airspace, and including by deploying new Patriot batteries to the eastern part of the alliance. And by doing that, and also through our AWACS surveillance planes and increased air policing, air patrolling, we are both increasing the capabilities we have to monitor, to track, but also to ensure that we are able to react if needed. NATO's integrated air and missile defense tracked the flight path of an object which entered Romanian airspace on Sunday. In response, Romanian fighter aircraft scrambled immediately to investigate, and the Romanian authorities and NATO are residents, as we're also reviewing the incident that ended with the crash of a drone in Croatia. The indications we have so far on the drone that crashed in Croatia outside Zagreb is that that was not an armed attack, not an armed drone, but it just highlights that with more military activities in the air, with drones, with planes, there is a risk for instance accidents, and therefore we need to be extremely vigilant. We need to react when needed, and we need to make sure that we have the communications, the line of communications also with the Russians, to prevent incidents from really creating dangerous situations. So that's the reason why we are increasing the presence and also the surveillance and monitoring of the airspace over NATO.
Bloomberg, lady in blue, just behind. Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Natalia Drozdiak from Bloomberg. I just wanted to follow up on what you said in your introduction about the risk of false flag event and Russia maybe using chemical weapons. How would NATO respond in such a scenario? Is this a red line for potential NATO intervention? Thank you.
Any use of chemical weapons will be a violation of international law, will be a violation of the ban that, or the treaty that bans chemical weapons, and Russia has signed to that convention. We call on Russia not to use chemical weapons. We call on Russia to withdraw all its forces and to stop the fighting, but in particular not to use any chemical weapons. Russia has used chemical agents before to attack and actually kill political opponents. We have also seen that Russia has supported the Assad regime in Syria and helped to facilitate the use of chemical weapons several times in Syria. And any use of chemical weapons is absolutely unacceptable, and therefore it is also extremely important that Russia understands that it is unacceptable if they consider any use of chemical weapons, and we are also very vigilant about the possibility of them trying to stage some kind of pretext false flag operation to provide an excuse for any type of use of chemical weapons.
Okay, we'll go to NPR, Deutsche Welle, lady in pink.
Thank you very much. Just somewhat of a follow-up on Natalia's question. She was asking whether what NATO would do and whether this changes your red line. So as you say that you are looking at NATO's military posture again, is this something that you would consider changing? You have said that this would be a war crime, and we know that simply warning Russia against doing something is not enough of a deterrent to stop it. So if NATO knows, or if NATO sees that a chemical attack could take place and you say that's a war crime, would NATO consider changing the fact that it would not intervene in case of such a threat? Thank you.
Our main responsibility is to protect and defend all NATO allies. It is important that Russia understands that we are there to do exactly that. We have conveyed a very clear message to Russia about that we also see when they try to stage pretexts for the use of chemical weapons. We have seen that they throughout this crisis have tried to create different kinds of false flag operations to try to provide excuses for the use of force. We saw that in the lead-up to the intervention, and now we have seen them accusing Ukraine and also NATO allies developing chemical weapons. And that's an absolute lie, and therefore it also makes us a bit concerned about the possibility that they are actually planning to do that. The President of the United States and other allies also made it very clear that if they use chemical weapons, there will be a high price to pay. But I will not speculate about any military response from the NATO side, except for saying very clearly that NATO's main responsibility is to make sure that we defend and protect all allies.
DPA, gentleman in white, just behind, yeah. No, just, no, okay. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung.
Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Secretary General, after the demise of the INF Treaty, it's been NATO's position that the Russian deployment of SSC-8 will not be reciprocated by the deployment of medium or intermediate nuclear-capable missile systems. In the light of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and President Putin's threats, nuclear threats to NATO, in your view, does this stance need to be reviewed?
The demise of the INF Treaty was a serious setback for international arms control, because the INF Treaty, agreed in 1987, banned all intermediate range weapon systems. Then over the last years, over actually several years, we have seen that Russia has deployed a new missile which violates this treaty, and then that led to the demise of the treaty a few years ago. We have stated from the NATO, and Russia has deployed these weapons over now several years, the SSC-8. We have made it clear that we will not mirror what Russia does. So we have no plans to deploy nuclear-capable intermediate-range land-based systems in Europe. At the same time, we need to be able to make sure that we are able to respond and protect all allies, also in a new security environment where Russia has deployed more nuclear-capable missiles. And therefore, we have to do many things at the same time. We need to strengthen our air and missile defense. We are doing that. We need to invest more in advanced conventional capabilities, including fifth-generation aircraft. And I welcome the German decision to invest in fifth-generation aircraft. We need also to increase the readiness and our ability to monitor, detect, and of course we also need to make sure that NATO's nuclear deterrent remains safe and secure and effective. And that's exactly what we are doing when we are now making sure that we exercise and ensure the effectiveness of our nuclear deterrent.
Okay, we have Associated Press.
Hi, Mark from Associated Press. Mr. Secretary General, what do you know about the 3 European leaders visiting Ukraine today?
NATO allies and the European leaders have had extensive contacts with Ukraine and the political leadership in Ukraine, including with President Zelensky throughout the whole crisis and also to lead up to the crisis. I think it's important that leaders of NATO countries, of European member states, are engaging closely with President Zelensky. We will have the defense minister of Ukraine attending the NATO defense ministerial tomorrow by video link, and therefore I think it's important that we, at all levels, in different formats, engage and meet with the Ukrainian political leadership.
Interfax.
Thank you. Interfax Ukraine, Irina Sommer. This morning, some mass media spread information about possible extraordinary summit, NATO summit, next week. can you please confirm this? And second, technical question. According to my information, it took for NATO bureaucracy 1.5 weeks to implement Ukrainian request for fuel. Can you please comment on this too? Thank you.
Well, NATO allies are providing and have provided a lot of different types of support to Ukraine. Some of this is channeled through the NATO framework, some are provided bilaterally, and for us it is important that we provide support on short notice and that we provide critical support which Ukraine needs. So overall I think the message is that over many years leading up to invasion but also after invasion, allies have been very quick in stepping up and providing support. And again, I'm a bit reluctant to go into all the details about exactly how and where and when, but the overall picture is that allies are providing significant support, and they've done some on short notice, and that's different types of weapons, but also that includes fuel. Well, NATO allies have consulted and coordinated closely over several weeks, both in the lead up to the invasion, but also after the invasion. We had a virtual summit just one day after, and we had different ministerial meetings, also extraordinary ministerial meetings, and we will have an extraordinary defense ministerial meeting tomorrow. Then we are able to convene also a NATO summit with all the NATO leaders on short notice, but I cannot go into more details about that now.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions online. We'll go to jutarnji list, Augustin Pajoka.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Secretary General, I have a question which many people in Croatia are asking. How is it possible that a drone of 6 tons heavy enters NATO airspace and flies for around an hour and crashed in the capital of a NATO member state, while you are so vigilant in defending NATO sky? And do you know something more, whether it really was a drone without a weapon or something? Because the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense said that there was an explosive device in this flying object that crashed in Zagreb. Thank you.
Well, I spoke with Prime Minister Plenković on Sunday, and we are working together to establish all the facts, but the preliminary indications and information we have is that this was an unarmed drone, and that the drone was off course, and that it ran out of fuel and crashed outside Zagreb, or crashed in Croatia. But we will have more confirmed facts soon, but that's the information we have so far. I think also it is important to realize that allies are exchanging information, and that this drone was tracked by the NATO's integrated air and missile defense tracked the flight of the drone that later crashed in Zagreb. But again, we will make sure that the different allies that were involved share all the information, and then we can establish all the facts about what this happened. I think, if anything, it demonstrates the need to further strengthen integration, further strengthen information sharing among allies, and also to invest more and upgrade everything from radars to our presence of air and missile defense systems, and that's exactly what we do also by deploying more Patriots in the eastern part of the alliance.
Okay, we'll go to Robert Lupitu, Calea Europeană.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Mr. Secretary General, I want to ask you whether there will be a speed-up process for this establishment of the NATO battle group in Romania, and also, since you mentioned about a reset in NATO's defense posture after Russia's invasion into Ukraine, do you think that this reset will also mean a unitary approach both for the northern part of the eastern flank and both for the southern part of the eastern flank, we will see the same level of troops and defense commitment in the Baltics, in Poland, and also in Romania and Bulgaria? Thank you very much.
So we have already increased significantly our presence in the eastern part of the alliance, also in the Black Sea region, with more troops. I went to Romania a couple of weeks ago, and I met with US forces, German forces, and other forces there who have actually increased their presence. And now the lead elements of the NATO response force have been deployed to Romania, French troops. And this demonstrates that there is already a significant increased military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. We speak about 40,000 forces on high readiness and the direct NATO command. Then we have the national forces. We have also bilateral arrangements. So in total, this is a quite significant presence both in Romania and the southeast of the alliance, but also in the Baltic region. This is our immediate response. And as I said, the battle groups is under establishment with the French-led VJTF element. Then what we will discuss at the Defense Ministerial meeting is not only the immediate response and need for support to Ukraine, but we will also look at the need to reset our presence, our deterrence and defense posture in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the integration of Russian and Belarusian forces. That will take some more time because I think we need to assess the different options. We need advice from our military commanders, and I expect that the ministers, when they meet tomorrow, will agree will agree to ask our military commanders to provide advice for a more longer-term adaptation. So I think it's important to distinguish clearly about the immediate response, already tens of thousands of more troops, air power and naval power, and then the more long-term adjustment of our posture. There will take some more time before we take final decisions. I expect that to be made at the NATO summit at the end of June.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.